You know that feeling when you want to get your head around something complex, to really grasp the important stuff without getting lost in all the details?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's exactly what we're doing right now. We're diving deep into a topic you brought to our attention, and it's fair to say it's a bit outside the usual combat knife throwing, a new approach to knife throwing and knife fighting by Ralph Thorn.
yeah. Interestingly, this isn't your typical circus performance guide. Thorne's aim, and really the core insight of the book, is to explore knife throwing as a practical skill,
Right?
specifically with applications in combat and, self-defense. It definitely makes you reconsider what you thought you knew about throwing knives.
Absolutely. When the title first came up, I immediately pictured those like spinning blades hitting a target at the circus.
Sure, the classic image.
But Thorne quickly challenges that. He argues that the common assumption that a thrown knife is only useful for stabbing overlooks a completely different way of thinking about it. Prepare for a few surprises, because this deep dive definitely goes against some conventional wisdom.
Which immediately brings up a key question.
Mhm.
How do we transition from that idea of a rotating kind of showy throw to a practical, effective technique?
Exactly.
And the book provides a very logical progression,
Hmm.
starting with, well, the crucial element of knife balance, then covering targets and safety considerations,
Okay.
and finally detailing the specific methods for spear style and combat throwing.
Okay, so let's get into this idea of balance. Right away, the book throws a curveball by suggesting that the standard view on throwing knives might be off.
Mm.
Thorne points out that many people involved with knives, even in a fighting context, see throwing as purely for entertainment. The prevailing thought, he says, is that a thrown knife can only reliably cause a penetrating wound.
Making anything else just chance, basically.
Yeah, making anything else a matter of chance.
An interesting contrast here is how the book describes typical throwing knives. Thorne discusses the common belief in a front-heavy design where the weight is concentrated in the blade.
Right, I've heard that.
But beginners often find these frustrating because they tend to spin too much in the air, you know, making it hard to get them to stick accurately. Figure 1 in the book actually shows this excessive rotation, the knife tumbling wildly.
Exactly. And this directly leads to Thorne's main point about what makes a good combat throwing knife. He essentially reverses the thinking on those symmetrical, center-balanced knives we associate with circus acts.
He does.
His argument is that these aren't actually ideal for a real-world confrontation precisely because of how they're balanced.
That's right. Their even weight distribution makes them much more prone to tumbling end over end.
Mm.
At typical combat distances, this erratic spinning significantly reduces the likelihood of the knife hitting point first with any real force.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? Thorne champions a completely different kind of knife.
He's a big proponent of knives that are point-first heavy. Think of it like a dart or maybe a miniature spear.
Okay.
With the majority of the weight in the front, the knife naturally wants to fly point forward. This design increases the chances of penetration and sticking, even without a lot of rotation.
And Thorne even shares his own experience learning this point-first method. He explains that it went against the traditional circus-style techniques he initially encountered.
So he had to unlearn things.
He did, yeah. He had to actively unlearn those ingrained habits to develop his approach, which focused entirely on that direct point-first impact.
And this viewpoint really influences his recommendations for choosing a throwing knife. He specifically advises against buying those standard throwing knives you see in catalogs,
Right.
because they're often designed for that flashy spinning effect, not for consistent practical results. These knives are usually balanced to rotate easily, which, as we've discussed, makes a reliable point-first hit less likely.
It's crucial to understand Thorne's criteria for a more effective throwing knife then. He suggests it should ideally have significant weight at the point, be made of dense material, and have a thick spine for strength.
Okay, strength makes sense.
A sharp point is obviously essential, and he recommends a length of at least 9 inches or so. Cheap, lightweight knives simply won't have the momentum and stability needed for this technique.
Now, what about the handle? You might assume a wrapped or, specially designed handle would give you a better grip and improve your throw.
It seems logical.
But Thorne contends that the distribution of weight in the blade itself is the most critical factor for accuracy. While a secure grip is important, the overall balance is paramount. He even suggests looking at repurposing things like bayonets and swords.
That's right. He points out that some military bayonets, particularly those with a more pronounced spear-like point, can be quite well suited for this style of throwing because of their inherent forward weight.
Huh. And it's not just about purpose-built or repurposed military hardware either. Thorn makes the point that even improvised knives can be effective if they have that key point-heavy balance.
Right, if the weight's right.
Conversely, he warns against certain types that are less suitable. Things like thin, flexible knives that might bend or wobble in flight,
Mm-hmm.
kitchen knives with wide blades that can catch a lot of air resistance, and knives that are simply too long to control effectively during the throw.
Yeah, makes sense. And to further illustrate this concept of balance, the book even details how to modify a bayonet for better throwing performance. Figure 5 uh, provides specific dimensions for removing sections of the handle to shift the weight forward.
Oh, interesting. So you actually cut parts off.
Yeah, to adjust the balance.
Yeah.
Importantly, Thorn stresses the need to resecure the grip with tape or another suitable material after any such modification to ensure safe and effective handling.
Okay, so we've established the importance of a point-heavy knife, explored different ways to acquire one. Now, how do you actually hold this thing to throw it in this spear-style manner? Thorn introduces the underhand cuff grip as a simple and effective starting point.
Okay, underhand cuff.
This involves positioning your thumb and forefinger on top of the blade.
What's interesting about this particular grip is how it naturally encourages and helps maintain that point-first orientation throughout the throwing motion. It promotes a more linear movement of the arm,
Ah,
which is fundamental to the spear-style technique we'll discuss in more detail shortly.
all right, so you've got your point-heavy knife, and you're using the underhand cuff grip. What are you actually throwing it at? Let's talk targets.
Good point, targets.
Thorn recommends using thick wooden backboards, specifically suggesting softer woods like poplar or even just securely stacked pieces of scrap lumber.
And the reasoning behind this choice of material is crucial for safety. Softer woods are more likely to allow the knife to penetrate and stick cleanly.
Rather than bouncing back.
Exactly. Rather than glancing off, or, more dangerously, bouncing back unpredictably, which is a significant risk with harder types of wood.
And you can forget about those hanging targets that are so common in circus-style knife-throwing acts.
Yeah, not for this.
Thorn explains that those swinging targets are designed for knives that are thrown with rotation, not the relatively spin-free spear style we're focusing on here. For this method, a solid, stable backboard is definitely the way to go.
This naturally leads us to, well, a non-negotiable aspect of any activity involving sharp objects. Safety.
Absolutely paramount.
Thorn emphasizes the absolute necessity of ensuring that you have a clear throwing area, completely free of any potential obstructions, and most importantly, any other people. You need to establish a safe zone.
Right, a clear zone. No one walking through.
Where no one can inadvertently walk into the path of a thrown knife?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he strongly cautions against throwing knives in areas with hard surfaces like concrete or stone.
Yeah, that's a big one.
These surfaces dramatically increase the risk of dangerous ricochets, where the knife bounces back in unpredictable and potentially harmful directions.
Eye protection is another critical safety measure. Thorn recommends wearing safety glasses or similar protective eyewear at all times when throwing.
Makes sense. Splinters, bounce backs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Due to the potential for splinters to fly off the wooden target, or, as we mentioned, the risk of a bounce back hitting you in the eye.
He also advises wearing durable clothing and sturdy boots. While this might seem like overkill,
Maybe a bit.
it's actually a practical way to protect yourself from accidental drops, missed throws that might land near your feet, or even just the sharp edges if you're handling these tools frequently.
Fair enough. And of course, despite all precautions, minor accidents can still happen. Thorn stresses the importance of immediate first aid for any cuts. Keep any wounds clean, and don't hesitate to seek professional medical attention if it's deep or serious.
Good advice.
He recommends having a basic, well-stocked first aid kit readily accessible whenever you are practicing.
Finally, when you're not actively throwing, safe carrying and storage are paramount. Thorn suggests using appropriate sheaths to cover the blades,
Essential.
preventing accidental injuries both to yourself and to anyone who might come into contact with the knives. It's about treating these tools with the respect they deserve.
Okay, so we've covered the essential equipment, the right kind of knife and a safe target, and the crucial safety guidelines. Now we arrive at the heart of the book's new approach: spear-style knife throwing. Could you explain the core principles of this technique?
Certainly. Thorn is very precise in his definition of spear-style throwing. It's fundamentally about the knife traveling point first through the air with the minimum possible rotation.
Okay, minimal rotation.
That's the key differentiator from the rotational style you typically see in entertainment.
The basic difference, as Thorne explains it, lies in the intended outcome. In spear-style throwing, the primary objective is direct penetration of the target.
Right, sticking it in.
You're relying on the kinetic energy of the knife, its point-heavy balance, and a relatively straight flight path to pierce the material.
He describes a couple of fundamental techniques for executing a spear-style throw. The first is the overhand throw. Picture yourself throwing a spear or maybe a dart.
Okay.
You grip the blade, bring your arm back in a smooth motion, and then release the knife with a forward thrust. Figure 12 in the book shows this action.
Then there's the underhand throw, which directly relates to that underhand cuff grip we discussed earlier.
Right, the thumb and forefinger on top.
In this technique, you grip the blade from underneath, often with your thumb positioned on top, and the throwing motion involves more of a flick of your wrist and a forward extension of your arm. Figures 13 and 14 offer visual guidance here.
And does he mention anything about the wrist?
Yes, Thorne emphasizes the importance of keeping your wrist relatively straight at the moment of release to maintain accuracy. Less wobble, basically.
Now, as with any skill that involves throwing, there are several factors that will influence how accurately you can hit your target using the spear style. Thorne discusses elements such as the distance, the stability and alignment of your stance,
Stance is key.
and perhaps most critically, the consistency of your release. Even minor inconsistencies in your technique can significantly affect where the knife lands.
Interestingly, even when minimizing rotation, the knife is still subject to the effects of air resistance, especially when throwing at longer distances.
Ah, windage.
Exactly. Thorne touches on the concept of windage, suggesting you might need to make small adjustments to your aiming point to compensate for the subtle ways the air can push the knife slightly off course, much like a breeze affects a dart.
And for those looking to extend their range or maybe create distance in a more dynamic situation, Thorne briefly introduces some more advanced techniques.
Like,
He mentions things like the sidearm throw, which can potentially generate more power, and variations in stance, such as backpedaling or sidestepping, allowing you to throw while moving away from a potential threat.
this leads us to what is arguably the most serious and potentially controversial aspect of the book: combat knife throwing.
Yeah, we need to tread carefully here.
It's absolutely essential to state clearly, as Thorne himself does, that this is a grave topic with potentially lethal consequences. This is not about a sport. It's about self-defense in extreme situations.
Precisely. Thorne emphasizes that knife throwing should only ever be considered as an absolute last resort when you are facing a genuinely life-threatening situation and have exhausted all other possible options.
It's not something to be taken lightly at all.
Or employed casually, definitely not.
It's also critically important to have a clear understanding of the legal ramifications of using a knife in self-defense. These laws can vary dramatically depending on your specific location and the circumstances.
You really need to know the law where you are.
Absolutely. You must be fully aware of the potential legal consequences of your actions.
One potential advantage that Thorne points out in a combat scenario is the element of surprise. An attacker is far less likely to anticipate someone throwing a knife at them, which could potentially create a crucial moment of hesitation, disorientation, or disruption.
He also discusses the significance of adopting adaptable combat stances. These aren't fixed formal positions, but rather fluid stances that allow you to move quickly and throw from various angles.
More dynamic.
Yeah, as opposed to a static, conventional stance. He provides examples like a boxer stance or a more squared-off stance that presents a smaller target, as illustrated in Figure 23.
Thorne outlines some practical, albeit highly dangerous scenarios where knife throwing might conceivably be employed in self-defense.
Such as?
These could include using a throw as a diversion to create an escape opportunity, momentarily incapacitating an attacker at a distance, or as a final desperate measure if you're physically cornered with no other defense.
But he strongly reiterates that developing any meaningful level of proficiency in combat knife throwing demands extensive and dedicated practice. This is not a skill you pick up quickly or casually.
No way. In such high-stakes situations, accuracy and speed are absolutely paramount. You can't afford to miss.
Finally, Thorne touches on the potential psychological impact a thrown knife could have, even if it doesn't directly strike the aggressor.
Just the act itself.
Right. The shock and unexpected nature of being targeted like that could potentially cause hesitation, disorientation, or maybe even make them abandon the attack altogether.
So to recap our deep dive into Ralph Thorn's combat knife throwing, We've explored the fundamental distinction between the rotational circus style and the direct, penetrative spear style throwing.
hmm And the book strongly advocates for the importance of a point-heavy knife balance, specifically for this combat-oriented approach.
Throughout our discussion, we've emphasized that safety must be the absolute top priority in all aspects of handling and throwing knives. Can't stress that enough.
Absolutely. And finally, we've examined the serious and potentially lethal application of knife throwing in a combat situation as a last resort, underscoring the critical need for extensive training and a thorough understanding of the relevant legal implications.
And it's important to remember that all the information we've discussed today comes directly from the source material you shared with us, offering a fascinating and perhaps unexpected perspective on the art and potential of knife throwing.
Yeah, it really does. This raises a compelling question for you to consider. In a world where certain skills are traditionally valued, what role might seemingly unconventional or overlooked abilities play in personal self-reliance?
Interesting thought.
And beyond that, this deep dive highlights how even subjects that might be too niche or even archaic can contain layers of complexity and practical considerations that are truly worth understanding. Always, of course, with a strong emphasis on safety and legality in any exploration of such topics.